A dust-kissed silence. The dust, a fine ochre powder, settled over everything, a silent benediction upon the lone ranch. It coated the rough-hewn planks of the porch, softened the edges of the wagon wheel propped against the barn, and muted the vibrant hues of the desert bloom. Even the air seemed thick with it, tasting faintly of dry earth and sun-baked rock. Inside the small, surprisingly neat ranch house, a different kind of stillness had fallen. It wasn't the silence of the land, but the quiet hum of unspoken things. Silas Lone, his hands calloused from years of wrangling cattle and coaxing life from unwilling soil, found himself polishing a worn leather saddle, though it needed no such attention. His gaze, however, kept drifting to the kitchen, where the soft clatter of earthenware punctuated the quiet. Sister Agnes, the brunette, was preparing supper, her movements economical and graceful, a stark contrast to the more boisterous energy of Sister Beatrice, the redhead, who was currently attempting, with limited success, to mend a tear in Silas's canvas work shirt. Sister Mary, the blonde, sat by the window, a book of scripture open on her lap, though her eyes, often lost in the vastness beyond the glass, seemed to be observing the dance of motes in the sunbeams. "You're going to put a new hole in it, Sister Beatrice," Silas drawled, a hint of amusement in his voice. He hadn't expected to find himself bantering with nuns, especially not three who looked as though they belonged on a painted fresco rather than in his dusty kitchen. Beatrice, her brow furrowed in concentration, pricked her finger with the needle. "Blast and botheration," she muttered, then caught herself, a blush rising on her cheeks. "Forgive me, Mr. Lone. This infernal fabric is tougher than a mule's hide." Agnes chuckled softly from the kitchen. "Perhaps it is best left to someone with more experience in tailoring, sister." Her voice was like smooth river stones, calming and reassuring. Silas pushed himself up from the workbench, the saddle left forgotten. "It's just a work shirt, sister. No need to fuss." He walked over, his shadow falling over Beatrice's bent head. Her scent, a surprising mix of lavender and something clean and earthy, reached him. It was a stark contrast to the usual smells of sweat and leather he was accustomed to. "Here, let me see." He took the needle and thread from her, his large fingers surprisingly deft as he repaired the tear with a few quick, strong stitches. Beatrice watched, her eyes wide, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. It wasn't just admiration for his skill, it was a more profound awareness. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, they gathered around the small, scarred wooden table. Agnes had conjured a surprisingly hearty stew from the meager provisions, its aroma filling the small room with warmth. Silas found himself eating more slowly than usual, savoring not just the food, but the unfamiliar camaraderie. "Bishop O'Connell truly believes this land holds the key to redemption," Sister Mary said, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortably between bites. Her voice was soft, almost ethereal, yet held an underlying conviction. Silas grunted. "Redemption for what?" "The land's just land, sister. You put the work in, it gives a little back." He looked at the three women, their habits a stark black against the flickering lamplight. "Still don't understand why he sent you three here. Surely there are other places more suitable." Agnes met his gaze directly, her dark eyes steady. "We are here because we are needed, Mr. Lone. Our order has always sought to serve, wherever God's will leads us. And sometimes, His will leads us to places that are unconventional." Her gaze lingered on him for a beat too long, a silent question in its depths. Beatrice, ever practical, interjected, "And because, as the bishop so eloquently put it, we were destitute as a church mouse in a cathedral fire. No money for a new mission, you see. Your ranch was the only option presented." She gave a wry smile, a flash of her spirited nature escaping the confines of her habit. Silas couldn't help but crack a smile in return. "Destitute, huh? Well, you're certainly earning your keep. This is the best stew I've had in years." He meant it. He hadn't realized how lonely the silence of his ranch had been until it was filled with their presence. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted to the practicalities of ranch life, to the struggles of the dry season, to the distant rumors of new settlers pushing west. Silas found himself explaining the intricacies of cattle branding, the importance of water rights, and the unpredictable nature of the desert. He watched Agnes listen with quiet intelligence, Mary with a thoughtful, almost spiritual curiosity, and Beatrice with an eager, almost childlike enthusiasm, often interrupting with questions that made him chuckle. He caught himself, more than once, observing the way the lamplight burnished Agnes's dark hair as a loose strand escaped her veil, the surprising strength in Beatrice's hands as she unconsciously kneaded the bread, the gentle curve of Mary's neck as she tilted her head in thought. These observations, these small, intimate details, felt dangerous. They felt forbidden. When it was time for their evening prayers, a strange quiet descended again. Silas watched them, 3 figures kneeling in the corner of his rough living room, their voices rising in a soft, melodic hum that was utterly foreign to him, yet strangely comforting. He felt a peculiar pull, a desire to understand, to be part of that quiet devotion. But he remained standing, a solitary figure on the edge of their sacred space, a chasm of belief and experience separating them. As they rose, Agnes approached him. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Lone," she said, her voice soft. "And for the repairs to Sister Beatrice's shirt." Her eyes, in the dim light, seemed to hold a profound understanding, an empathy that reached beyond the immediate words. He nodded, a lump in his throat he hadn't anticipated. "It's nothing, sister." He watched them retreat to the small room they now shared, the door closing softly behind them, leaving him alone once more. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the lingering scent of lavender and stew, with the echo of soft voices and quiet prayers, with the unsettling, undeniable presence of 3 women who had, in the span of a single day, begun to turn his dust-kissed silence into something else entirely. A silence that held a promise, and a potent, dangerous tension. An unexpected plea. The scent of brewing coffee, strong and dark, filled Silas's small kitchen, mingling with the faint aroma of the Nuns' rosewater soap. He watched Sister Beatrice, her blonde hair catching the morning light as she meticulously wiped down the worn wooden table. Sister Agnes, the brunette, was already at the stove, coaxing a sputtering fire into life beneath a cast-iron skillet. Sister Mary, the redhead, sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of the prairie, a half-eaten biscuit forgotten on her plate. It had been a week since their arrival, a week of unsettling adjustments. Silas, usually content in his solitary rhythm, found himself anticipating their quiet industry, their hushed conversations. Yet, an undercurrent of unease persisted. He often caught glimpses of their true selves, Beatrice's occasional mischievous glint, Agnes's deep, thoughtful sighs, Mary's restless energy, barely contained by her habit. He knew their ages now, Agnes the eldest at 32, Beatrice 28, and Mary a surprising 24. He knew Agnes preferred her coffee black, Beatrice with a dollop of cream, and Mary, surprisingly, with a spoonful of honey, a detail that had both amused and disarmed him. This morning, however, the air felt thicker than usual, a subtle shift in the current of their shared existence. As Silas poured his coffee, Agnes cleared her throat, a sound that usually preceded a pronouncement about chores or the garden. Instead, she turned to him, her expression unusually solemn. "Silas," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it, "we need to speak with you." He set his mug down, the ceramic clinking against the tabletop. "About what, sister?" Beatrice exchanged a glance with Mary, then with Agnes, a silent communication passing between them. It was Mary who finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It's about Bishop O'Connell." Silas felt a prickle of irritation. He'd hoped their presence here meant an end to the bishop's machinations. "What about him?" Agnes stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly before her. He wants us to return." Silas's brow furrowed. But I thought you were sent here for redemption. And because your order was destitute. That was the pretense, Agnes admitted, her gaze unwavering. The truth is, our order, the Sisters of the Guiding Light, possesses something Bishop O'Connell desires. Something he believes is hidden within our convent. A cold dread began to coil in Silas's stomach. This was more than just church politics. What is it? A relic, Beatrice supplied, her voice tight with an uncharacteristic fear. A very old text, said to contain ancient knowledge, dangerous knowledge, if misused. Silas scoffed. Dangerous knowledge? Are we talking about a treasure map or some forbidden magic? Mary, who had been silent, now pushed herself away from the window, her eyes wide. It's more than that, Silas. The bishop, he's changed. There's a darkness about him now, a hunger we've never seen. He's been asking questions, strange questions, about ancient symbols, about the veil. The word hung in the air, thick and heavy. Silas felt a tremor of recognition, a faint echo from old campfire stories, tales whispered by grizzled prospectors. The veil. A boundary, they said, between their world and something else. Agnes nodded slowly. Mary is right. We believe he intends to use the relic not for its spiritual guidance, but to tear open the veil, to unleash something that should remain bound. Silas stared at them, his mind reeling. Nuns, ancient relics, a corrupted bishop, and a rift between worlds. It was lunacy. Yet, the earnestness in their eyes, the genuine fear, was undeniable. Why tell me this? He finally asked, his voice rough. What do you expect me to do? Beatrice stepped closer, her usually placid expression now etched with desperation. We believe you can protect us, Silas. And by protecting us, you protect the relic. The bishop's men will come. They're already searching for us. He believes we hold the key to finding it. Agnes added, her voice a low plea, we know it's a great burden to ask, but we have nowhere else to go. You are the only one we can trust. Silas looked from one determined face to the next. The three women, so different, yet united in this desperate plea. He saw not just nuns, but individuals facing an impossible choice, caught in a tide of danger they barely understood. His ranch, his solitary haven, was about to become a battleground. And suddenly, the thought of them leaving, of the silence returning, felt profoundly wrong. He found himself nodding, a slow, reluctant assent. All right, he said, the word a commitment to something far larger than himself. We need a plan. A collective sigh of relief filled the kitchen. A fragile hope, flickering in the face of an encroaching darkness, had found a momentary refuge in the dusty heart of the prairie. New rhythms on the ranch. The scent of brewing coffee, richer and sweeter than Silas's usual bitter tar, now mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Sunlight, filtering through the kitchen window, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, a constant, shimmering reminder of the new life that had settled into his solitary ranch. It had been a week since the nuns arrived, and the rhythm of the Lone Star had irrevocably shifted. Agnes, the pragmatic brunette, had taken charge of the kitchen, her movements efficient and her voice a low hum as she recited morning prayers over a skillet of sizzling bacon. Beatrice, the serene blonde, often found in the small, makeshift garden she'd started, humming hymns as she coaxed tender shoots from the recalcitrant soil. And then there was Mary, the fiery redhead, whose presence was a spark, a challenge to Silas's ingrained quietude. You're going to let that fire die again, Mr. Silas, Mary's voice, a surprising alto, cut through the morning's quiet. She stood by the hearth, a long poker in her hand, her sleeves rolled up to reveal slender, strong forearms. A wisp of hair, the color of a sunset, had escaped her wimple, framing a face usually alight with an intensity Silas found both unsettling and compelling. Silas grunted, stirring his coffee. It'll do. He preferred his fires low, his life uncomplicated. Mary merely sighed, a sound that managed to convey both exasperation and a hint of amusement. She plunged the poker into the embers, stirring them until a new flame leaped, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. "A good fire needs tending, Mr. Silas. Just like, well, like everything else." Her gaze met his, briefly, before she turned back to the hearth, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. Later, as Silas checked the fences, he found Beatrice already there, her habits tucked up, her hand surprisingly calloused as she helped mend a section of barbed wire. "Sister Agnes says we must earn our keep, Mr. Silas," she said, her voice soft, almost ethereal, contrasting with the sturdy work she was doing. "And idleness is a sin." Silas grunted, taking the pliers from her. "No need. I manage." Beatrice smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips. "Perhaps. But a shared burden is lighter, wouldn't you agree?" She picked up a loose plank, positioning it deftly. He found himself working alongside her, a strange, almost comfortable synchronicity developing. He'd never had a partner for ranch work, not really. It was different. The real tension, however, simmered beneath the surface of these new routines. Bishop O'Connell. His name hung in the air like a storm cloud, always just beyond the horizon. Agnes, the most direct of the three, brought it up during supper. "We haven't heard anything, Silas," she said, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "That worries me." "Silence isn't always a good sign," Mary added, her eyes, the color of emeralds, scanning the darkened windows as if expecting to see O'Connell's corrupted priests materialize from the shadows. Silas speared a potato. "Means he's planning. Or he's given up." He knew the former was far more likely. O'Connell wasn't a man to abandon a quest, especially one for a relic of such power. The veil. The very thought sent a shiver down his spine. The nuns had described it in hushed, fearful tones, a barrier between their world and something else. Something ancient, hungry. "He won't give up," Agnes stated, her voice firm. "Not for the grimoire of Ethelred. He believes it will grant him dominion. Over all." The grimoire. The relic they protected. Hidden somewhere on the ranch, though Silas still didn't know where. The nuns had been maddeningly vague, insisting it was safer that way. That night, a strong wind rattled the windows, and the old house groaned. Silas lay in his bed, listening, not to the wind, but to the hushed murmurs coming from the room across the hall where the nuns slept. He pictured them, three silhouettes against the moonlight, perhaps praying, perhaps just talking. He thought of Mary's laugh, Beatrice's quiet strength, Agnes's unwavering resolve. And a strange, unfamiliar warmth settled in his chest. He rose quietly, grabbed his rifle, and stepped out onto the porch. The moon was a sliver, casting long, distorted shadows. He scanned the horizon, his senses heightened. Nothing. Just the vast, empty expanse of the prairie, stretching into an inky blackness. Yet, he felt it, a faint tremor in the air, a whisper on the wind that wasn't just the rustling of dry grass. The world was holding its breath, and soon, Silas knew, he wouldn't be able to hold his any longer either. The new rhythms of the ranch were just a prelude. The real music, discordant and dangerous, was yet to begin. Under the desert stars. The desert night descended, a velvet shroud embroidered with countless, indifferent stars. Silas sat on the porch, the rhythmic chirping of crickets a counterpoint to the distant howl of a coyote. The air, still warm from the day's relentless sun, now carried the faint, sweet scent of night blooming cereus from somewhere far off. He watched the silhouettes of the nuns, gathered by a small fire they'd built near the barn, their habits stark against the flickering orange glow. Agnes, ever practical, was meticulously checking the perimeter with a lantern, her shadow stretching long and distorted. Beatrice sat serenely, her hands clasped, a quiet hum on her lips that was almost swallowed by the vast silence. But it was Mary who held his gaze. She stood a little apart, her red hair catching the firelight like a fiery halo, her eyes scanning the horizon, not with fear, but with an almost predatory alertness. Earlier, as the sun dipped, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and bruised purple, the first hint of trouble had arrived. A lone rider, a gaunt, dark-clad man on a skeletal horse, had appeared on the ridge, pausing for a long moment before melting back into the deepening shadows. He hadn't approached, hadn't even signaled, but his presence was a chilling pronouncement. "He watches," Mary had said, her voice a low murmur as she'd brushed past Silas on her way to the fire, the subtle scent of incense clinging to her habit. Like a carrion bird. Now, under the expansive dome of the night sky, Silas felt a prickle of unease. He wasn't afraid of a fight, not after a lifetime spent carving out an existence in this unforgiving land. But this felt different. It wasn't a squabble over water rights or a skirmish with bandits. This felt ancient. "You're thinking too much, Silas," Beatrice's voice, soft as a desert breeze, drifted to him. She had approached silently, a mug of steaming herbal tea in her hands. He hadn't even heard her. He took the mug, the warmth seeping into his calloused fingers. "Just wondering what comes next." "What comes next is always what we make of it," she replied, her eyes, luminous even in the dim light, fixed on his. "But in the immediate, I believe we have visitors." Before Silas could question her, a low wicker from the barn announced a horse. Agnes's lantern beam cut through the darkness, illuminating two figures riding slowly towards them. One was the gaunt rider from earlier. The other, a larger, more imposing man, sat astride a magnificent black stallion, his silhouette framed by the distant starlight. Bishop O'Connell. Mary moved with surprising speed, stepping forward, her hand instinctively going to a hidden pouch at her waist. Agnes took up a defensive stance near the grimoire, which had been moved to the relative safety of the porch. O'Connell dismounted with an almost theatrical grace, his vestments, though dusty from travel, still exuding an air of authority. His companion remained mounted, a silent, menacing shadow. "Sisters," O'Connell's voice, smooth and resonant, cut through the night. "And the esteemed Mr. Silas. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "As comfortable as running from a zealot can be, Bishop," Mary retorted, her voice sharp, unafraid. O'Connell merely smiled, a thin, humorless baring of teeth. "Zealot? I assure you, sister, I am merely fulfilling my sacred duty. That book," he gestured towards the porch, "belongs to the church. It is a dangerous relic in untrained hands." "It is a dangerous relic in your hands, Bishop," Agnes countered, stepping forward to stand beside Mary. "You seek to wield its power, not to protect it." Silas stood slowly, his hand drifting to the Colt holstered at his hip. The air thickened with unspoken threats. He was out of his depth in this theological skirmish, but he understood the language of menace. "My dear sisters," O'Connell's eyes, glinting in the firelight, swept over each of them, lingering for a fraction of a second on Silas. "Let us not make this difficult. Hand over the grimoire, and you may continue your pilgrimage, unmolested. Refuse, and things become less pleasant." Beatrice, who had remained silent, now spoke, her voice still impossibly calm. "Bishop, you misunderstand. This is not about us. This is about what is right. The grimoire chooses its protector, not the other way around." O'Connell's smile vanished. "Then it seems we have reached an impasse." He nodded to his companion, who slowly dismounted, a long, wickedly curved blade appearing in his hand. The moonlight glinted off its polished surface. Silas drew his Colt. The click of the hammer cocking echoed in the sudden, profound silence. The desert night, under its indifferent stars, had finally drawn its breath, waiting for the first violent act. A shadow on the horizon. The air thickened, pressing down on the ranch yard. Silas felt the familiar weight of his Colt in his hand, its cold steel a stark contrast to the sudden heat that prickled his skin. O'Connell, a silhouette against the fading crimson of the western sky, radiated an unsettling calm. His companion, the gaunt rider, remained a silent, menacing shadow, his eyes, if Silas could even call them that in the deepening twilight, fixed on the nuns. "You refuse," O'Connell's voice was a silken whisper, yet it carried an undeniable edge, "to yield what is not yours to keep." Mary stepped forward, her red habit a defiant splash of color against the grays and browns of the yard. "It is not yours to take, Bishop. This grimoire belongs to a power far greater than your petty ambitions." Her voice, usually soft, now resonated with a fierce conviction. Agnes, ever the pragmatist, remained beside Beatrice, her gaze flicking between O'Connell and Silas. Beatrice, her face pale, clutched the heavy book tighter, its dark leather binding seeming to absorb the last vestiges of light. "Petty ambitions?" O'Connell chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent a shiver down Silas's spine. "My dear sister, you mistake the true nature of power. This grimoire," he extended a hand, palm up, in an almost inviting gesture, "is a key. A key to unlocking realms you can scarcely comprehend. Imagine, sisters, the influence. The persuasion." Silas shifted his weight, his eyes never leaving O'Connell. The bishop wasn't just talking about a book, he was talking about dominion, about control. And Silas had a gut feeling that control extended far beyond the earthly realm. Mary's lips curled into something akin to a snarl. "We know what it is, O'Connell. And we know what you intend to do with it. And you believe," O'Connell's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping over Silas, then back to the nuns, "that this rancher can protect you? From me?" Silas felt a surge of cold anger. "They're under my roof, Bishop. And that means they're under my protection." O'Connell's head tilted, as if considering this. "A noble sentiment, Mr. Lone. But misguided. You stand against forces you cannot possibly comprehend." He gestured to his companion. "This is but a taste of what awaits those who defy me." The gaunt rider shifted, his form seeming to lengthen, to stretch. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, sending a ripple of unease through the horses in the corral. Silas heard a whimper from the direction of the barn. He knew his dogs, usually boisterous, were cowering. Mary met the bishop's gaze, unflinching. "We are not afraid of your shadows, O'Connell. The light we carry is stronger." "Then let us see," O'Connell's voice dropped, becoming almost hypnotic. "Let us see if your faith is truly as potent as you claim." With a subtle flick of his wrist, O'Connell's fingers twitched. The air around them grew heavy, cloying. Silas felt an inexplicable pressure on his chest, as if an invisible weight was pressing him down. The shadows, already long, seemed to deepen, to coalesce into shifting forms at the periphery of his vision. He gripped his Colt tighter, knuckles white. This wasn't a gunfight. This was something else entirely. Agnes, her face grim, reached for the crucifix hanging around her neck. Beatrice, her eyes wide with fear, pressed herself against Mary, the grimoire held like a shield. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, emanating from the grimoire. A soft, golden light pulsed from between Beatrice's fingers, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. It wasn't blinding, but it was insistent, a warm glow in the encroaching chill. O'Connell's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. "So, it speaks to you. Interesting." He raised his hand higher, his fingers splayed. The oppressive pressure intensified. Silas felt his knees buckle slightly. He fought against it, refusing to be driven to the ground. Mary, her face etched with fierce determination, met O'Connell's gaze. "It speaks of truth, Bishop. A truth you have long abandoned." "Truth is a malleable concept, sister," O'Connell sneered. "Power, however, is absolute." The gaunt rider, as if on cue, took a step forward. The ground beneath its feet seemed to crackle, leaving faint scorch marks. A wave of intense cold washed over Silas, stealing his breath. He instinctively raised his gun, but he knew, with a chilling certainty, that bullets would be useless against whatever this creature truly was. "Stay back!" Silas roared, his voice hoarse. Mary, however, stepped in front of him, placing herself between Silas and the advancing shadow. Her hand, instead of reaching for a weapon, reached out to the grimoire. As her fingers brushed the cover, the golden light intensified, blossoming into a vibrant aura that enveloped all three nuns. It pushed back against the oppressive darkness, creating a small, luminous sanctuary in the heart of the ranch yard. O'Connell's face twisted in frustration. "You cannot hold it forever, sisters. The night is long, and my patience is not." He lowered his hand, and the oppressive weight momentarily receded, replaced by a chilling wind that whipped around them, stirring dust and rustling the leaves of the cottonwoods. It was a reprieve, but Silas knew it was only a temporary one. The real battle, he realized, was just beginning. He lowered his Colt, his gaze unwavering on O'Connell. He was a rancher, a man of the land, not a warrior against the supernatural. Yet, as he looked at the three women, defiant and resolute within their protective glow, he knew he couldn't back down. He was their guardian, and he would stand with them, even against the encroaching shadows of a world he never knew existed. "Then let's see who breaks first, Bishop," Silas said, his voice low and steady. "Because I've got all night." A silent acknowledgement. The golden light, born from the grimoire and channeled by Mary, pulsed with a steady, unwavering warmth, pushing back the encroaching shadows. O'Connell, his face a mask of furious frustration, retreated a few steps, his companion, a creature of writhing darkness and predatory intent, hissing softly as it too recoiled from the sacred glow. The air within the ranch house, once thick with the bishop's malevolence, now hummed with a different kind of power, a defiant serenity. Silas, positioned squarely between the nuns and the unholy duo, felt the prickle of the grimoire's energy on his skin. It wasn't the searing heat of a prairie fire, but a gentle, pervasive force, like the first warmth of dawn. He risked a quick glance back at the nuns. Mary, her fiery hair a stark contrast to the shimmering gold, held the ancient book with a reverence that spoke of deep, abiding faith. Agnes, ever the stoic, stood firm beside her, a hand hovering protectively over Mary's shoulder. Beatrice, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, clutched a small, worn rosary, her lips moving in a silent prayer. O'Connell's voice, when it came, was a low growl, laced with venom. "You cannot hide behind that parlor trick forever, sister. That book belongs to me. It is a key, a conduit to powers you cannot even fathom." He gestured vaguely at the golden barrier. This is merely a temporary reprieve." Mary's voice, though soft, carried an unexpected steel. "It is not a parlor trick, Bishop. It is the light of faith, and it will protect us from your darkness." Silas didn't speak. His gaze remained fixed on O'Connell, memorizing the twitch of his jaw, the glint of malice in his eyes. He knew, with a primal certainty, that this was far from over. The quiet confrontation was merely the opening salvo in a war that had just begun on his land. As the golden light solidified into an almost tangible wall, O'Connell's shadowy companion began to pace, its unseen claws scraping against the unseen barrier. A low, guttural growl emanated from its form, a sound that vibrated in Silas's bones. O'Connell, seeing that his immediate intimidation had failed, narrowed his eyes. "Very well," he sneered, a chilling smile touching his lips. "If you wish to play this game, so be it. But know this, Lone. Your sanctuary is nothing more than a cage. And I have all the time in the world." With that, O'Connell turned sharply, his black cloak swirling around him like a malevolent storm cloud. The shadowy creature followed, melting into the deeper gloom of the evening. The darkness outside the golden sphere seemed to intensify, but it no longer held the immediate threat it had moments before. As their forms vanished, a collective sigh of relief, subtle but profound, rippled through the room. The golden light, though still potent, softened, becoming less a blinding barrier and more a comforting embrace. Mary, her shoulders slumping slightly, gently closed the grimoire. The golden light receded, folding back into the ancient text. Silence descended, heavy with unspoken questions and lingering tension. Silas slowly turned to face the nuns. Mary met his gaze, her eyes, though tired, holding a deep gratitude. Agnes offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. Beatrice, still clutching her rosary, looked at him with a newfound respect, a flicker of something akin to admiration in her wide blue eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Lone," Mary said, her voice a little hoarse. You stood with us." Silas, unaccustomed to such direct expressions of gratitude, simply grunted. "Someone had to." He looked from Mary's earnest face to Agnes's steadfast one, then to Beatrice's hesitant vulnerability. He had promised to protect them, and he would. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that this wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about something more, something he couldn't quite name, but felt in the quiet strength emanating from these women. He looked around his humble ranch house, now imbued with the lingering scent of ancient magic and nascent hope. It wasn't just his home anymore, it was a sanctuary, a line drawn in the sand against a terrifying darkness. The quiet rancher, who had sought only solitude, now found himself irrevocably bound to a fight far grander than any he could have imagined. And in the silent acknowledgments exchanged between him and the three nuns, new, unspoken understanding began to blossom, fragile yet resilient, in the heart of the wild frontier. The air, though still carrying the echoes of O'Connell's threat, also carried the subtle scent of possibility, of a shared purpose. Silas walked over to the window, peering out into the moonlit night. The stars glittered, unperturbed, but he knew the peace was a fragile illusion. The bishop would be back. And when he did, Silas Lone would be ready. He glanced back at the nuns, who were now quietly discussing their next steps, their voices low and calm. He had made his choice. And as the night deepened, he felt a quiet resolve solidify within him, a silent acknowledgement of the path he had now chosen. The attack and the shield. The westering sun, typically a soothing presence, now stretched long, disquieting shadows across Silas's property. The air, thick with parched earth and distant pine, vibrated with a tension alien to the ranch before O'Connell's arrival. Silas, axe in hand, chopped kindling with a practiced rhythm, each blow a fleeting respite from his churning thoughts. He knew the grimoire, a thrumming core of power within the house, had drawn O'Connell once and would inevitably draw him again. Inside, practical Agnes oversaw Beatrice and Mary's preparations, not with timber, but with a bulwark of spirit and resolve. Agnes pressed her palms to the glass, her lips moving in silent supplication, a faint, shimmering warmth emanating from her touch. Beatrice mirrored her, delicate fingers tracing intricate patterns on the panes, ancient hymns a soft murmur. Mary, meanwhile, carefully placed small, smooth stones along each windowsill, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Silas had witnessed the golden light surge from her before, he trusted her instincts implicitly now. "It's not wood, Mr. Lone," Agnes had clarified earlier, sensing his doubt. "It's more. A spiritual shield, woven with prayer and focus. He can shatter wood. He cannot so easily break righteous will." As twilight bled bruised purples and oranges across the sky, Silas settled onto the porch, rifle resting across his lap, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The wind stirred, rustling the dry grasses, bearing a faint, metallic tang. He felt it before he saw it, a subtle shift, a sudden chill, as if the very land held its breath. Then came a rustling, too heavy for the wind, too deliberate for a coyote, moving through the brush beyond the fence line. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle, knuckles white. "They're here," he rumbled, his voice low. Inside, the house's light perceptibly dimmed, though no clouds veiled the sun. A cold current snaked under the door, prickling Silas's skin. Then he saw them, emerging from the fading light, not O'Connell himself, but three massive figures, vaguely human, their forms indistinct, like shadows imbued with substance. They moved with an unnatural gait, limbs seemingly elongated, too fluid. Silence accompanied their passage, save for the whisper of dry leaves disturbed. These were not men. These were the things O'Connell commanded, specters of malevolence. Mary, now. Agnes's voice, though strained, rang with unwavering authority. From within, a soft, ethereal radiance began to emanate, bathing the windows in a faint, golden luster. It pulsed, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity. The shadowy figures halted, their advance arrested by the burgeoning glow. One emitted a low, guttural growl that grated on Silas's nerves. Still, they pressed forward, slower this time, seemingly drawn to the light, yet repelled. They reached the fence, shadowy hands extending towards the golden barrier. As they contacted the ethereal shield, a faint sizzle filled the air, like water hitting hot stone. Smoke, not of fire, but of something unholy, curled from their forms. They recoiled, but only for an instant. Then, with a unified, silent resolve, they lunged. Impact. The house shuddered. Silas felt the vibration through the porch's floorboards. A low, sustained groan echoed from inside, not of pain, but of immense effort. The golden light pulsed violently, flickering like a candle in a gale. Silas, instinct screaming, fired. The bullet tore through the air, striking one of the shadowy figures. It passed through without effect, like shooting smoke. He cursed, reloading automatically. His rifle was useless against these things. They're attempting to breach the spiritual shield directly. Agnes cried out, her voice now taut with strain. Mary's silhouette was visible through the glowing window, arms outstretched, the grimoire held aloft. The golden light intensified, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Beatrice knelt beside her, eyes closed in fervent prayer, hands pressed to the window frame, augmenting Mary's efforts. Suddenly, a fissure rent the golden light, a dark crack spreading across the invisible barrier. One shadowy figure, its form momentarily solidified by its exertion, began to force its way through, its distorted face visible for a terrifying instant, a mask of pure malevolence. No! Mary's voice was a desperate cry, imbued with a power Silas hadn't heard before. With a surge of unimaginable will, she slammed the grimoire down onto the window ledge. The golden light flared, blindingly bright, and a resonant thrum vibrated through the very foundations of the house. The shadowy figure caught in the breach shrieked, a sound that tore at the fabric of the night, and was thrown back, dissolving into wisps of black smoke that dissipated in the wind. The other two figures hesitated, their forms wavering. The golden shield solidified once more, stronger now, pulsing with a steady, unwavering brilliance. They seemed to confer silently, their shadowy heads inclining together, before melting back into the deepening gloom, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. Silence descended, broken only by the rapid thumping of Silas's heart. He lowered his rifle, his hands trembling slightly. The air still crackled with residual energy, and the faint scent of ozone hung heavy. Mary, leaning against the window frame, slid slowly to the floor, the grimoire clutched to her chest. Beatrice immediately knelt beside her, offering comfort. Agnes, though weary, stood tall, her gaze fixed on the receding darkness. Silas walked into the living room, the golden light still faintly illuminating the space. He looked at Mary, her face pale but resolute. You did it." She nodded, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. "We did." She looked at Agnes and Beatrice, then back at Silas. It held. For now. The skirmish was over, but the greater conflict, Silas knew, had just begun. The ranch, once a sanctuary of quiet solitude, was now a bastion, and he, its unlikely guardian, was ready for whatever came next. The forbidden allure of Mary, the fierce devotion of Agnes, and the gentle strength of Beatrice, they were all now intrinsically woven into the fabric of his purpose. A bishop's dilemma. The golden light, a beacon of defiant grace, pulsed from the lone ranch, visible even from the distant hilltop where Bishop O'Connell stood. A bitter scowl marred his otherwise serene, aristocratic features. He watched, a knot of impotent fury tightening in his chest, as the spectral tendrils of his advance force recoiled, dissipating like smoke before a gale. He had underestimated them, these three women and their reluctant protector. "They've established a ward," Father Malcolm murmured, his voice tight with an awe he struggled to suppress. He stood a respectful pace behind O'Connell, the desert wind whipping at his black cassock. "A formidable one." O'Connell's hand clenched around the silver crucifix hanging from his neck. "Formidable, but not impenetrable. They merely bought themselves time." His gaze narrowed, fixed on the shimmering perimeter of light that now embraced Silas's property. "The girl. Mary. She's the conduit. The grimoire amplifies her innate sensitivity. But it's not just her. The collective will. Their righteous will, as they so self-righteously call it." He spat the words, the idea of their moral superiority anathema to him. A messenger, a gaunt, shadowy figure, materialized beside them, bowing low. "Bishop, our scouts report a significant increase in the relic's energy signature. It's radiating." "Indeed," O'Connell replied, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "They're using it to defend themselves. Foolish, desperate creatures. Each exertion strengthens my connection, reveals its secrets." He turned to Malcolm. "Prepare the next phase. No more phantom attacks. We need a physical presence. A distraction. Something to draw out the rancher, to break their focus." Malcolm hesitated. "Bishop, with all due respect, a direct assault on hallowed ground, on a sanctuary, it might draw unwanted attention. From the archdiocesan authorities, perhaps even the Vatican." O'Connell's eyes blazed with a cold fire. "The Vatican is 1,000 miles away, embroiled in its own petty squabbles. And as for local authorities, who are they to question the will of a bishop seeking to reclaim what was stolen? This relic, Malcolm, is not merely an artifact. It is power. Power that will allow us to reshape this corrupted world. Do you question the necessity of that?" Malcolm flinched under the intensity of the bishop's stare. "No, Bishop. Never. Your will be done." He bowed deeply and retreated to convey O'Connell's commands. Back at the lone ranch, the golden light hummed, a tangible warmth against the chill desert night. Silas, his rifle resting against the porch railing, watched the dissipating shadows. The fight had drained him more than he cared to admit, a primal weariness settling in his bones. Agnes, her face etched with a mix of exhaustion and resolve, joined him. "They won't give up, Silas. Not O'Connell. He'll escalate." "I know," Silas said, his voice rough. He looked at Mary, who sat on the steps, the grimoire glowing faintly in her lap, her eyes closed in concentration. Beatrice hovered protectively nearby, her hand resting gently on Mary's shoulder. "She's incredible. All of you are." "It's the relic," Agnes corrected softly, "and the grace it bestows. But it takes a toll. Mary especially." Suddenly, the air shimmered, and a faint, ethereal hum resonated through the ranch. Not the comforting thrum of their shield, but something else, something intrusive. "What is that?" Beatrice whispered, her eyes darting nervously. Silas peered into the darkness beyond their glowing perimeter. A distant, rhythmic clang, like metal striking rock, began to echo across the desert. It grew steadily louder, accompanied by a low, guttural chanting. "Sounds like a work crew," Silas muttered, bewildered. "Out here? In the middle of the night?" Agnes's eyes widened in realization. He's sending men. To dig. To breach the ward physically. He won't attack the structure directly, not yet. He'll try to undermine it, literally. The clanging grew insistent, closer now. The chanting, deep and resonant, seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Silas could now make out the faint outlines of figures moving beyond the golden light, pickaxes glinting under the pale moonlight. They were not spectral figures this time, they were men, clad in dark, rough-spun clothes, their faces obscured by shadows and the distance. "They're not just digging," Mary said, her eyes still closed, a tremor in her voice. "They're consecrating the ground. Perverting it. Trying to create a path of unholy influence directly to us." Silas felt a cold dread seep into him. This was a different kind of attack, a more insidious one. He gripped his rifle tighter. "We can't let them." Agnes nodded grimly. "No. We must not." She looked at Mary, whose brow was furrowed in strain. "Mary, can you extend the ward? Create a deeper perimeter? Disperse their efforts?" Mary opened her eyes, revealing a flash of golden light within their depths. I can try. But it will require immense focus. And it will draw more of the relic's energy. It will weaken the core. "We have no choice," Beatrice stated firmly, stepping forward. "If they breach the ground, they breach our sanctuary. We must meet this with our own righteous will, Mary. And Silas, we need your eyes. Your protection." Silas took a deep breath, the scent of dust and sage filling his lungs. He looked at the three women, their faces illuminated by the golden glow, their resolve a palpable force. He was no longer just a rancher defending his land, he was a guardian, bound by a purpose far greater than himself. "All right," he said, chambering around. "Let's show the bishop exactly what righteous will looks like." A new sunrise. The first rays of dawn, usually a gentle promise of a new day, now felt like a spotlight on their precarious stand. The air, crisp and carrying the scent of sagebrush, also bore the faint, metallic tang of the bishop's impending arrival. Silas, perched on the roof of the barn, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watched the distant dust cloud grow. It wasn't a supernatural swirl this time, but the very real churn of tires and hooves. "They're here," he stated, his voice a low rumble. Below, Mary, Abigail, and Alara stood by the porch, their faces etched with a blend of apprehension and resolve. Mary's eyes, still bearing the faint golden gleam from her last exertion, scanned the horizon, her hands clasped tightly around the grimoire. "How many?" Abigail asked, her hand resting instinctively on the worn handle of the axe leaning against the porch post. "2 wagons, 12 men on horseback," Silas reported, lowering the binoculars. "Looks like a work crew, not just enforcers." He dropped lightly from the roof, landing with a soft thud. "Shovels, pickaxes. He's going for the ground." Alara, ever the pragmatist, nodded grimly. "He means to pollute the very earth beneath us. To make this place inhospitable to our sanctuary." Mary's gaze hardened. "He will not." She looked towards the fields, vast and sun-drenched, then back at Silas. "We must extend the ward. To the property lines. To every inch of this land." Silas's brow furrowed. "Mary, you nearly collapsed last time." "That was just the house. The entire ranch, it's too much. It's our only chance," she insisted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "If he consecrates the ground to his will, we lose everything. This land, this refuge, will become an instrument of his power." Abigail stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Mary's shoulder. "We'll help you. We'll stand with you." "How?" Silas asked, his eyes moving between the three women. "What can we do?" Mary opened the grimoire, its ancient pages rustling. The words, they are not just for me. They are for all of us. Each word holds a spark of intent, a whisper of connection. If we speak them together, if we pour our will into them, perhaps we can amplify the word. Silas looked at the approaching dust cloud, then at Mary's determined face. The idea felt wild, desperate, yet he saw the unwavering faith in her eyes. "All right," he said, his voice taking on the steel he reserved for impossible situations. "Tell us what to do." As the bishop's crew disembarked, a motley collection of rough-looking men and grim-faced priests, they fanned out across the fields, shovels gleaming in the morning sun. Their leader, a burly man with a scarred face, pointed towards the house with an almost theatrical flourish, then began barking orders. Mary, standing on the porch, took a deep breath. She extended her hands, the grimoire open before her, its golden light beginning to pulse faintly. Abigail and Elara stood on either side of her, their hands reaching out to touch Mary's arms, their eyes closed in concentration. Silas positioned himself in front of them, his rifle held ready, a silent bulwark. Mary began to chant, her voice low and resonant, unlike anything Silas had heard from her before. The words, ancient and melodic, filled the air, each syllable resonating with a deep, earthy power. As she spoke, the golden light around her intensified, not just enveloping her, but flowing outward, through Abigail and Elara, then extending further, a shimmering wave of energy washing over the ranch. Abigail, her face contorted in effort, began to echo fragments of the chant, her voice a strong alto blending with Mary's. Elara, though silent, projected an intense focus, her aura of calm somehow amplifying the nascent energy. Silas felt a strange tingling sensation, a warmth spreading from his core, as if the very air around them was thickening with purpose. The bishop's men, initially oblivious, continued to dig. But then, one of the priests, a thin man with sharp eyes, looked up, his gaze drawn to the golden shimmer now visible even from a distance. He muttered something to the scarred leader, pointing towards the house. The digging slowed, then stopped. The golden light, however, did not. It stretched further, encompassing the old water pump, the corral, the small, sun-baked garden. It reached the fields, touching the parched earth, and Silas could almost feel the land responding, a deep thrumming beneath his boots. A sudden, sharp cry erupted from the bishop's men. One of the priests, attempting to drive a consecrated stake into the ground, recoiled with a shriek, his hand smoking as if he'd touched a live wire. Others, attempting to dig, found their shovels striking an invisible, impenetrable barrier, sparks flying from the metal. Confusion rippled through the ranks, quickly turning to fear. Mary, her face beaded with sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps, pushed harder. The golden light surged, pushing past the property lines, embracing the very air above and the soil below. It was no longer just a defensive ward, it was a declaration. This land, this home, was claimed. The scarred leader, seeing his men falter, roared an order. "Keep digging. It's a trick. Push through." But his words lacked conviction, his own eyes wide with a dawning apprehension. Silas watched, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. These women, these nuns, had not just sought refuge, they had chosen to fight. And in doing so, they had brought forth a power that even he, a man of the earth, had never truly believed possible. The sun climbed higher, illuminating not just the standoff, but the undeniable, growing strength of their righteous will. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, was now a shining beacon of defiance.